in the centuries since the world first transitioned into the governance of modern nation-states, the western boundaries of the Euxean continent have been dominated by Erusea. It is a nation synonymous with industrialism, expansionism, and a martial spirit that all too often ensured its achievements came at the expense of foreign neighbors. Erusea has known triumph and tragedy, first as a kingdom, then as a federal republic, and now again as a kingdom restored. The historic kingdom of Erusea first achieved global prominence under the Delis dynasty. Under this family's rule, the kingdom annexed several neighboring states, achieving a near hegemony on the continent, rivaled only by the Federation of Central Euxea to the east. Despite these successes, internal pressures led to the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a new federal republic. The regime change, however, did little to affect Erusean foreign policy. Occupied territories were forcefully integrated by the new government, and further annexations were pursued and achieved. By the early 1990s, the Federal Republic of Erusea seemed poised to invade the bordering Republic of Amba and the independent state of Ugelis. Much of the Erusean armed forces was mobilized on those countries' respective borders, but the military buildup prompted the Federation of Central Euxea to intervene and guarantee their independence. The standoff dominated the affairs of the Euxean continent until, on April 29, 1996, the Ulysses asteroid, first discovered 2 years earlier, was confirmed to impact the Earth in April 1999. Euxea was among the continents predicted to suffer the most damage, and the revelation caused widespread panic and the destabilization of public order. The Federal Republic of Erusea and its neighbors sought an immediate rapprochement, and the standoff came to a close. Though tensions had not fully eased, Erusea became a member of the Euxean Allied Forces, a concentrated effort both to prepare the continent for the Ulysses impact and to prevent Osea and Yuctabania, the world's rival superpowers, from leveraging the crisis for their own benefit. In defiance of what was likely an earnest attempt at continental unification, several smaller nations on Euxea's southern coastline announced their intention to join the Osean Federation, ostensibly so they might benefit from Osea's own attempt to prevent the impact of Ulysses. The presence of Osean forces on the Euxean continent galvanized conservative elements within both Erusea and the other Euxean allied forces, culminating in an attempted coup d'etat in 1997. For over a year, much of Erusea fell under the control of rebel elements that had been present within its own military. Though the Federal Republic eventually reclaimed its territory and achieved victory together with the Euxean allied forces, the conflict had diverted desperately needed resources away from Ulysses' preparations. The Stonehenge turret network, a railgun complex in western Euxea, had just barely become operational when the first impacts occurred on July 3rd, 1999. Though Stonehenge prevented the extinction of human life across Euxea, at least 10 smaller meteorites impacted Erusean territory, devastating the Republic's infrastructure. One of these, thereafter known as Riker Crater, struck near the Erusean capital of Farbanti, flooding the city's outlying municipal districts. To maintain the semblance of government, however, Erusea refused calls to move its highest officials, or its administrative capital. In the aftermath of the impact, the Federal Republic was expected to take a leading role in the reconstruction efforts, especially in the admittance of refugees. After accepting roughly 200,000 such displaced people, the country reversed its course, citing an unbearable strain on its limited resources. Further refugees were subject to severe restrictions, and the country largely closed its borders. The decision was internationally criticized, and Erusea heavily sanctioned. As the refugee crisis escalated, Erusea undertook a sudden invasion of San Salvation in 2003. This smaller nation was the location of the Stonehenge network, which Erusea quickly captured and reactivated. Led by the Federation of Central Euxea, the continent's other nations quickly organized their military forces under a joint framework known as the Independent State Allied Forces, or ISAF. The Continental War began on September 14, 2003, when the deadline for Erusean forces to withdraw from San Salvation expired. For the first year of the conflict, Erusea won devastating victories over ISAF, partially due to Stonehenge, which had been repurposed into a continent-spanning anti-aircraft weapon. For a brief period, ISAF was driven from the continent entirely, evacuating to the island of North Point, off Usea's northeastern coast. Attempts by Erusea to force the surrender of North Point were repeatedly repulsed, and by the spring of 2004, the situation had begun to reverse. Stonehenge was disabled in April of that year, enabling a massive ISAF counteroffensive across the continent. San Silvacian was liberated, Erusea itself invaded, and Farbanti eventually captured on September 19, 2004. The supreme commander of Erusean forces was killed in the battle, and the nation formally surrendered that same day. Despite this, fighting continued for the next few months, with rebel officers even attempting to weaponize asteroid remnants still in orbit, using a secret missile complex known as Megalith. Following this defeat, Erusea was forced to relinquish territories it had annexed over the previous centuries, with some granted self-rule as new sovereign nations. The city of Selatapora was one such territory, a critical blow to the Erusean economy, as it had long been one of its most important ports. The Erusean military was also drastically reduced in size and reorganized so that it would only be capable of self-defense. Public anger against the conditions imposed on Erusea culminated in a widespread terrorist campaign against ISAF occupation forces in 2006. In 2011, the largely ineffective provisional government was replaced by a return of a constitutional monarchy. The restoration of the Delis dynasty, it was hoped, would rally the divided nation and signal internationally a firm rejection of the Federal Republic's more fascist elements. In the span of only a few years, though, 2 Erusean kings died as a result of poor health, and it was Princess Rosa Cosette Delis that instead became the foremost representative of the Erusean people. Much of the attention of the monarchy in these years was directed towards the construction of the International Space Elevator, known colloquially as the Lighthouse. The site of which, formerly Erusean Selatapora, and the heavy involvement of the Federation of Osea, reignited the pre-Ulysses fears of foreign involvement on the Usean continent. The presence of Osean forces and environmental destruction caused by the space elevator's construction led to mass protests across Erusea. In 2019, convinced by a group of young, nationalist officers of the necessity of military action against Osea, the king of Erusea ordered the seizure of the space elevator and the aerial arsenal ships that protected it. These arsenal birds helped Erusea achieve air superiority across the continent in much the same way Stonehenge had over a decade earlier. Despite early gains, however, Osean forces captured Farbanti and large sections of the country before the destruction of orbiting satellite networks made the continuation of the war untenable. Erusea's government collapsed, with pro-peace conservatives, pro-war radicals, and various independence movements vying for control. After the space elevator was recaptured by Osean forces, a second Erusean provisional government was formed, with Princess Cosette at its head. The nature of this new Erusean government remains in doubt, as internal factions and outside powers seek to shape the future of the state. The constitutional monarchy is likely to endure, with the recent war against Osea blamed on nationalists linked, fairly or unfairly, to the previous Federal Republic. The Erusean Parliament will presumably be granted further authority to help curtail the potential for abuse by the reigning monarch. But its territorial claims are likewise now uncertain. Prior to its most recent defeat, Erusea was one of the largest nations on Usea. It stretched from the Amber Mountains in the east to the Spring Sea and Cascade Ocean in the west and north respectively. It encompassed great deserts, fertile shores, and the great cities of Farbanti and Anchorhead. At its height, its territory extended even further, and it remains to be seen if Erusea will again be carved apart as it was in 2006. Its military will almost certainly be disassembled. In the 1990s and early 2000s, its 4 major branches, the Erusean Air Force, Navy, Army, and Air Defense Force, were considered amongst the best in the world, the equal of every other Eusian nation combined. Much of this was credited to the Erusian Air and Space Administration, whose advanced research gave its military, especially its air force, a notable edge over other continental forces. This was epitomized in the legendary achievements of the 156th Tactical Fighter Wing Aquila and the 68th Experimental Squadron Sol in the Continental and Lighthouse Wars respectively. The Navy was similarly prestigious, with its most famous element, the Aegir Fleet, regarded as invincible before its complete destruction by ISAF pilots in 2004. In whatever state Erusea is allowed to exist in the new era, it will almost certainly be relegated to a puppet government of Erusea. In this way, the long-feared Osean dominance of Eusian affairs will finally come to fruition. It is said that a rose in a desert can only survive on its strength, not its beauty, and it remains to be seen what persists in Erusea of either.
The Templin Institute investigates the nations, factions, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.